This has been Building Bridges, your community and labor report with Mimi Rosenberg
and Ken Nash. And log on to our website at www.buildingbridgesradio.org.
This is WWUH, West Hartford, 91.3 on your FM dial. We can also be heard on WAPJ Torrington, 89.9 FM and 105.1 FM, Torrington Community Radio, WDJW Summers, 89.7 FM, and WWEB Wallingford, 89.9 FM. And we stream online at www.uh.org. Time now for Connecticut Radio Memories.
600 spot on your dial. WICC, Bridgeport, Connecticut.
I'm Bud Finch, and I'll be back right after Andy Corrales News. Next, over the sound of New Haven, WELI.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Bob Steele of WTIC Hartford, speaking to you from the Army's Bradley Field in central Connecticut, where 25 or 30 big four-engine bombers have arrived in the past hour or so. More are coming in all the time.
The latest news from the WTHT Hartford Times newsroom.
Town Hartford, we bring you Hartford Speaks, transcribed. I'm Bob Maurer. Here's Una King.
Well, you bright little spring boy, you're anticipating it a little bit, aren't you?
That's number 83, everybody, at WTIC, the Dickie Robinson Countdown Show. As we check out the top 100 records for 1967.
The Ken Griffin Show. WPOP.
From high atop Radio Mountain at 95.7, this is WBMI Hartford, Meriden. My name is Dan Bloom.
Connecticut Radio Memories, a series chronicling the first 6 decades of Connecticut's radio stations, as told by the people behind the microphones and behind the scenes. Episode 7, Brass and Park, radio stories from Waterbury and Bridgeport.
Perking there. We're going to put a pot of water on there and make some coffee. Right here in the chamber. Percolation scene. The chamber is at the 600 spot on your dial. WICC, Bridgeport, Connecticut, your favorite. My name is Ray Taylor.
Richard Ward Fatherly.
WICC was and still is a major regional Class 3 station.
Al Warren.
It's a landmark radio station. It's not very many AM stations can do what they're doing. They've just been around for a long time, and they're consistently in the number 1, number 2 all the time. It started in 1926.
Dick Ferguson.
WICC stands for the Industrial Capital of Connecticut.
Back in the 20s, it was the Industrial Capital of Connecticut, and that's where the ICC comes from.
But around the southern Connecticut, Long Island, suburban metropolitan New York City area, it was always a powerhouse, and with a very fabulous ground wave signal, with, as they used to say, transmitters on Long Island Sound at Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Radio historian Bob Payne.
ICC was owned by the old Yankee network.
Walt Pinto.
Everybody knows or knows about was Bob Crane. Bob did mornings at WICC.
Bob Crane was the program director of ICC. He became the morning man, but he was a funny guy.
Frank Delfino.
Yeah, he did the morning show 6 to 10. He's the one that got me on the station.
I interviewed him when we had our 50th anniversary.
Hi, this is Bob Crane. You're listening to the Al Warren Show, and it's true that Al's lazy, dishonest, bad-tempered, drinks, always late and shiftless. Come on, folks, no man's perfect. Oh, stop the music. That was good. Bob Crane, a living legend. Al, I was listening to you on my way to the studio today, and I said it's been almost 20 years since I did the early morning show here on WICC, and it's ironic that the station is now celebrating its 50th anniversary while I'm in town. I mean, this year. I'm actually doing a telethon this weekend up in Hartford for my good friend Elliot Gober, cerebral palsy telethon. But to come to town and listen to WICC and hear Al Warren doing the radio show, I never heard of you.
He came back, and I spent most of an afternoon on the air with him. And we reminisced, and he told some wonderful stories. But he was supposed to go from ICC. He had an offer to go to Boston, and for some reason he turned it down. He had another offer to go to St. Louis, and he turned that down. And then he had an offer to go to Los Angeles, and that's where he got his name.
Well, Bob, you left here and you went to KNX, right? Yes, in Hollywood.
And
then from there,
Heroes,
Donna Reed and then Hogan's Heroes and whatnot.
Bob Crane.
Again, Richard Ward Fatherly.
Who had been recruited recruited by CBS to go out to their KNX property in Los Angeles. Unfortunately, Bob Crane died a very horrible, untimely death. Then Frank Delfino, with a beautiful, mellifluous voice.
Frank Delfino was the program director. I believe Bob Crane hired Frank. Frank worked in Stamford with Harry Downey, and Bob Crane came in. I don't know how he knew Frank.
Kind of a World War II era hero, fighter pilot, P-47 Thunderbolts, P-40 Mustang fighter pilot over Italy, and that was a good fit for him because he's Italian.
Frank Delfino.
Well, I got out of the Air Force in 1946 and joined WSCC in Stamford. I stayed there for 5 years, working intermittently overnight at a station called WNEW in New York, where Martin Block and the Make Believe Ballroom happened. Eventually, I took an audition and went to work at NBC in New York at Radio City as an announcer.
And he worked briefly for NBC as under the name Del Campbell.
I was at NBC. They said, "Do you want to take a name or use your real name?" And because when I worked at WNEW, I used the name Del Campbell, and I decided to keep that. It sounded easy, and it was a name that struck me, and part of my last name, and the last name, I don't know where I got it. Stayed for a year and a half. I didn't like the commuting, and I was offered a 4-hour DJ spot back at WICC with Bob Crane and Wally Dunlap and a lot of the great guys of that era in the 40s and 50s. From 10 to 2, I did a show called Man Around the House. And that was it. Stayed there for a long time.
And was it primarily music programming, or was there talk mixed in?
It was top pop. Like King Cole and Glenn Miller and all the big bands. And that's about how long I stayed for 10, 15 years.
The music's great. The music's really great. That's the reason why more people will keep in tune with modern radio, keep in tune with WICC Hi-Fi.
When it started to get into rock and youthful-sounding music, that's when I decided to leave the business.
And great guy, very mellow, very soft-spoken, very polite, just about as nice a guy as you'd ever want to meet.
And then after me, Harry Downey. He was a great friend. I brought him into the station. He was an Indian background guy from upstate Gloversville, New York.
Harry Downey was the music director.
Then there was Harry Downey.
Again, Walt Pinto.
Afternoons were done by a guy with a great voice, Harry Downey.
A tall, muscular, huge voice who often boasted of his Mohawk Indian heritage. He was a wonderful guy and great on the air to listen to, and I believe he had worked for WNEW at one time. And he was the afternoon drive time guy, and ultimately was recruited by General Electric in Albany, Schenectady, Troy, as their featured talent on WGY. 810, 50,000 watts, one of the original 24 clear channel stations.
Who went on to WGY in Schenectady and stayed there throughout the rest of his life.
And after him, Jerry Knight did 6 to 10, and then Dick Alexander, great all-night guy, did the all-night show.
This is modern radio.
In 61, I was recruited by WICC to host their 7 to midnight show. It was aimed primarily at young adults, a kind of a top 40 tempo, and we played most, if not all, of the major hits. The licensee was lukewarm on heavy R&B rotation music, but generally speaking, I would not say we were a Motown sound in the mix. We played a few of them, but not many of them. Most of them were the image labels of Columbia, RCA, Capitol, etc., Decca, you name it.
The liveliest sound. 4,000 miles around. WICC, keep in tune with Channel 60.
Bill Coder was the morning man.
They had a morning man that was great. His name was Bill Coder.
Well, Bill Coder was the morning show host. He was a triple threat man. He could sing and also play the guitar. He'd also sing along with the instrumental versions of standard popular records and was very successful at doing it. He had a great voice. He was a Korea-era veteran and very funny, and he got his start at WSTC under the name The Old Commuter and was hired by Ken Cooper, who owned the station, operated by Connecticut, New York broadcasters, and was transplanted landed into Bridgeport doing the morning show, succeeding Bob Crane, who had been recruited by CBS.
Tiny Markle was there for a while also. He came over from NAB. I guess about 1982, he came over from NAB.
Don Mino.
In Bridgeport, he was known for, there was a problem with one of the schools and some upset students and so forth, and he came off the air and went right up to the school to try to talk people down, keep them calmed down. So he's very much of a community-oriented. He's the old-style thing that radio people used to always be.
Tiny, you know Tiny. Tiny was a classic guy. He passed away. Classic guy, yeah. Good man.
Back when I worked at WICC.
Again, Walt Pinto.
It was owned by a gentleman named Ken Cooper. I was on the air, and we had a no-visitor policy, and we tried to make sure that nobody would walk in, especially because we were in a big industrial building, and you had to have, access to get into our portion of the building. And we had a little tiny window about the size of one of those small panels that you could see out of this huge padded door, and that was all you could see out into the newsroom. And I saw somebody go by, didn't look like anybody I knew, and I was in the middle of a break, and I couldn't do anything at the time, but as soon as I got out of the break and started a record, I stood up and started to walk around the horseshoe-type console to go out and find out who was out there and throw them out. Before I could get more than a foot or two, the door opened, and this guy who hadn't shaved, has a plaid shirt on, looked like, perhaps just was driving a truck somewhere, walks in and sticks out his hand and says, "Hi, I'm Ken Cooper." And he owned the station, and I was about to go throw him out of his own radio station. And Jim and I talked about it because he did a very similar thing where he didn't get a chance to get any further than having the owner come in and introduce himself too. But I said, probably Ken would have appreciated the fact that I was guarding his station and being secure. But at the time, I was a little taken aback because I didn't know how he'd react when I said, "You can't stay in here,"
What was the format of WICC back then?
Pretty much top 40, but they did, again, something very unique. And Ken was a genius in many ways, and he put together feature radio, I think, before anybody had done it.
Again, Al Warren.
It was a music station. It was a music station, but it was like a full-service station. They used to call it Service 6.
And he called the station Service 6.
WICC, 60 on your dial. WICC, service with a smile. It's easy to see why more people agree on WICC.
And all throughout the day, you would hear features on everything from fashion to birds to gardening.
And they did little vignettes on birds and boating and fishing and fashion, etc., cooking.
I was doing a specific show in the evening called Talent Showcase, and Talent Showcase featured local live bands. I took the show over a couple of years after they'd started, and in the beginning, I guess there were some absolutely sensational bands, and after a while, the talent pool starts to get shallower and shallower. And of course, living in the shadow of Westport and Southport and that area, which is of course called the Gold Coast of Connecticut, there was quite a bit of money. And anybody from the age of 12 or 14 on up who had a parent who was making some money could just say, "Gee, I'd like to have a guitar and an amp," and they'd wind up with the latest Fender guitar and this phenomenal Fender amp that you probably would have to work for half a year to afford for normal working people. And so you had groups coming into the station that could barely play. They'd probably been together about a month, and after a while my hair started to stand on end, and I went to the management and I said, I think we've kind of burned out here. No, we want to keep the show on the air. So I said, I can't stand listening to these horrible bands. Once in a while you'd get a good one, but a lot of them were terrible. They were on 4 nights a week, Monday through Thursday. You'd have a different band every night. And then Friday you'd pick a winner for that week and then showcase what they did that was already pre-recorded from the show and play them.
Again, Dick Ferguson.
Whole era of WICC when it was owned by Ken Cooper and was known as Service 6. I remember listening to the station as I was growing up in New Haven. It was a real pretty interesting and pretty dominant radio station.
And the station evolved with the times and to where it is today.
Yeah, we're going to shake it up, baby. We're going to do a little twisting and shouting. Good morning, everybody. This is Al Warren. This is our final Golden Hour. It's got to be a solid Gold Wednesday. And not now, but a little later we'll take some calls.
Again, Al Warren.
1965. Frank Delfino was the program director. He hired me. Frank hired me. On remotes, way back when nobody else was doing remotes, they had a trailer that they used to use. They used to rent a trailer. I'm trying to think of where they got it from, but back in the 60s, they would go to train stations or in the morning, and they broadcast from the Westport station or the Bridgeport station, or, just to attract an audience, a morning audience, And then in the afternoon, they would do the same thing. But it's always a fun place to be. It was always a fun place to work. Some of the guys were really characters. There were just. I'm the only one there now that was there then. Everybody else is gone. I'm the senior person as far as, the air staff is concerned, as far as longevity is concerned.
All right, folks, we're moving right along here on the Golden Hour, 10:25 at WICC. Somebody wanted to hear this one.
WICC.
Oh, the shark, babe, has such teeth, dear, and it shows them pearly white.
I was doing mornings at ICC. As far as seniority, on-air seniority, it was Bob Steele, number 1, Ron Romer was number 2, and I was number 3, with seniority on the air, at one station for the longest time. Radio has been a fun place to be. I've been in radio since 1962, and it's just, more than almost 3/4 of my life. I started as a young man, a young guy, and it's been what a wonderful career. But radio today has evolved. It's not as much fun as it used to be.
And right now it's 71 degrees. Top story of the hour. Bridgeport police are after the killer of a Howard Avenue man. It's the city's 17th homicide of the year. Next news at 10 o'clock, bulletins at once. I'm Bob Michaels, and now more with Jim Buchanan on Radio 60 WICC, a Tribune broadcasting station.
Your number one radio station, WICC.
Some of the names that have come out of that station are just, they've gone to, especially the news guys that have come and gone from ICC into the big time.
Again, Dick Ferguson.
If you got a job in the news department at WICC, it was like almost an automatic into the CBS radio network and WCBS. There's a lot of well-known CBS radio news people who came right out of WICC, and very, very proud heritage of broadcasters who got their start, at WICC. And
for example, Sam Rosen does the NFL games, and he does the hockey for the Rangers, the announcer. Back in the 70s, he was my newsman in the morning when I worked mornings, and Sam worked at NHC doing the sports at night, and he would come in the morning like a zombie.
Again, Walt Pinto.
They had a news director by the name of Tony Brunton who left to go to CBS.
Tony Brunton left ICC. He was the news director, went down to be a big news person at CBS Radio.
They had another news director who went eventually to not only CBS but CNN. His name was Steve Young. And he was a big time. And before that, working at WICC was Christopher Glenn, who sadly we just lost a few months ago. And I was there working, just starting my career there. And Christopher Glenn was in editing his audition tape, looking for a job before he went to CBS. Very talented man.
Walt Dibble worked at ICC, who then went to TIC. Alan Sagal did also. Christopher Glenn, Jack Lawrence. The list is endless. The writers and the fellows who were news people that went on to be just writers at these big stations.
WJZZ went on the air in 1960. Dick Ferguson.
The original WICC FM, which had the call letters WJZZ at one time.
Built in 999, WJZZ, with facilities on Long Island Sound at Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Richard Ward Fatherly.
WJZZ, also referred to as WJZing.
And they went on the air
Don Mino
in 1960 as a jazz format.
And it was Ken Cooper's brainchild. It was billed as America's first all-jazz FM station.
And they went on the air at 2 o'clock in the afternoon program, and they would run till about 11 or 12 at night. No, but 24-hour radio was not common in the late 60s or even the early 60s. But they were on the air in 99.9, same as Star 99 is now, and they ran the studios, and it was all records, of course, as everything was at that time. But
Al Warren.
It was in the same building. It was in the same, on the same floor. It was on the Excite Battery building in Fairfield, and the FM was in the next room. But it was JZZ, and Dave Brubeck was the honorary program director.
You're listening to the Dave Brubeck Show on WJZZ FM at 99.9 on your dial. WJZZ has facilities on Long Island Sound at Bridgeport, Connecticut, and features the sound of the Dave Brubeck Show every Friday night from 8 until 9. At 10:30 tonight, WJZZ FM picks up the sound of live jazz in a continuation of Phase 2 in our long-range concept of programming. The sounds of jazz for you at 999 in the center of your FM dial.
But usually you did an hour on the FM. You play jazz, so you'd get off your AM shift and you'd go over for an hour on the FM. But you didn't do much talking. It was just all jazz for a while. And
Mike Lawless was the program director, and then Frank Delfino.
Frank Delfino.
They did a jazz and upscale recordings on the air.
And Harry Downey.
Harry Downey, who was a fellow that was an early mentor of mine from WICC Jock.
And we had a personality that Ken Cooper had hired to do fishing reports, and Ken was always of a creative bent, hired this guy to go out in a motor launch along the seashore and give fishing reports, and billed himself as Captain Phil Cutting.
Again, Richard Ward Fatherly.
I was asked to host 1 hour at 6 o'clock called Session at 6. Session at 6 was a playback of jazz album cuts selected by the program director, Mike Lawless, and published in a monthly catalog that they made available to the audience. And the music director, so to speak, was Dave Brubeck of nearby Weston, Connecticut.
WJZZ FM presents the Dave Brubeck Show.
Good evening, everyone. Mike Lawless sitting with Dave Brubeck again, and this evening's show is concerned with the musical leaders, jazz-wise, of the generation just past, 1950 to 1960. Naturally, we won't have time to get on all of the gentlemen that Dave considers leaders. We've talked about this before the show, but we will be playing perhaps 6 or 7 albums, and we will concern ourselves with the small groups. We will talk about some of the big bands of that generation, but for the most part it'll be the small groups. Dave, you've picked 6 LPs, and I'll tell the people what they are, at least the people featured. Jerry Mulligan, Charlie Parker, Miles Davis, Stan Getz, George Shearing, and Thelonious Monk. I don't think we'll go in any type of chronological order, Dave, but album-wise or word-wise, what do you think? We should start with Jerry Mulligan, perhaps.
Yeah, let's do Move from the... Well, this is about 1948, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. You want to stay with Miles, then?
Well, Jerry's on there, too.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You're right. Whose tune is this, anyway? Denzel DaCosta Best wrote it, right?
If you say so. He did.
When did you first hear this tune, Dave, Move?
Well, shortly after it was recorded. This was an album, I think, that took the whole country by storm as far as having an impact on the jazz musicians. So we were very much aware of it on the West Coast, out in San Francisco, shortly after it came out.
And it did come out, issued first as a single. It came out in January of 1949, and at that time you had the octet going, didn't you?
Oh, we had the octet since 46. So it did come out in 49. Okay, let's hear Move.
Well, we'll move to Move and also listen to Jerry's own tune called Jeru. Move and Jeru from the album Birth of the Cool, famous Miles Davis and Jerry Mulligan sides.
I know it had a very devoted following, particularly in New York City and on Long Island. It was really a talked-about idea whose time was long overdue, and it was a right idea on the right part of the radio spectrum for FM. The only flaw, of course, was that they didn't have FM stereo.
Now, jazz really never caught on as a format, at least for commercial stations. I know there was WRVR in New York and K-Jazz in San Francisco, but it never really took hold, did it?
Well, it never really took hold, not because people don't like jazz, but because people in the jazz business are preaching to the choir. That's why it didn't take off. However, there were some singular major jazz artists who wound up in the top 40. But when you talk about jazz, you're talking about esoteric music. It has a pretty narrow appeal. It's not general audience type music, most of it, except the big band things.
Again, Frank Delfino.
And he eventually went into a thing called a classical sound, where he developed the top 100 classical pieces.
Again, Dick Ferguson.
It once played the top 100 classics, and Leonard Bernstein was the sort of honorary program director, having selected the 100 top classics tunes. And
they started with number 1 and went right through 100. Some of the pieces lasted 5, 8, 10 minutes. Some of them lasted an hour, 2 hours. They played their whole course, and the announcing was done in between the pieces on the air. But it was called Top 100 Classical. It was quite an innovation for classical music then.
Again, Don Mino.
The station had two strange formats. They had the jazz, I think it ran until probably about 1961. 99.9, this is 1968. They were on the air from 5:30 in the afternoon until probably whenever the last tape ran out, maybe 11:40, 11:45 at night. And they had the top 100 classical music. Okay. 14-inch reels, reel-to-reel, and it was semi-automated. It was an engineer, and he'd get paid to start them, and I'd get a chance to get on, I'd switch a reel, I'd run down the hall, 50 feet down the hall and change them and go forth. But they were on the air 6 hours a day. So when the jazz format was on the air maybe 9 hours a day, the classical was on the air for 6 hours a day.
In 1969, WJZZ was sold, and by 1972, it had the call letters WPSB. Again, Al Warren.
And then they sold it. Then it was PSB.
Again, Dick Ferguson.
At any rate, when we bought it, it was called Passport Radio. It was owned by Herb Hobler, and it was affiliated with a station called WPST in Trenton, New Jersey, which was Passport Trenton and Passport Bridgeport. And Passport Radio was, they talked a lot about travel. You have to remember back then that FM maybe had 30% penetration into cars, and so people did kind of oddball formats, and his notion was that these people like to travel and that this radio station would generate a lot of advertising through travel-related ideas and whatnot. It pretty much didn't work. So we bought the station in 1973, and we took over in June, and in early August we put WEZN on the air, and with the beautiful music format.
This is WEZN, Stereo 100. Easy on your mind.
That format stayed pretty much intact through the 70s into the 80s when it sort of migrated into a soft AC format. In the early 90s, it renamed itself Star 99.9, and over time to the present evolved into more of a hot AC station, and that's what it is today.
WNAB first went on the air in 1941. Dick Ferguson.
The two big stations in the market were primarily WICC at 600 on the dial, which had like 25 shares in morning drive and pretty good numbers throughout the rest of the day, and then 1450 WNAB.
This is Ralph Flanagan, just stopping by for a moment on the Saturday night dance party, reminding you that this is the bright spot on your dial, 1450 WNAB, Bridgeport, Connecticut. And also reminding you that our latest RCA Victor record releases are now in your favorite music store.
That was a real viable station prior to 1973-74, and had a morning guy named Ray Carroll. Tom Kennedy was the general manager. It was owned by Harold Thomas and his family, who owned WATR and the FM that became WWYZ, and WNAB stood for We're Nuts About Bridgeport.
This is WNAB in Bridgeport. Hi there. This is Don Cornell stepping out of my Coral Records to remind you that you're listening to the Saturday Night Dancing Party. I'd like to remind you, too, that our music is on record. And now back to the man who spins them for you, Dick Bertelman.
John Ellinger.
I went down to Bridgeport to head up WNAB, which was a wonderful station. It was only 250 watts, and our competition was ICC, which was an amazing station. They had a signal all the way to Canada, clear signal on 600, and we were at 14 something way up there in the mud, as they called it. And it really didn't totally cover Bridgeport. So that was a particularly hard job. And what I did, I decided that we would try to give something entirely different. We really couldn't compete with ICC. We just didn't have the physical property. But we could compete on a way of selling radio advertising to people and tying it in with the community. And we did it so well that one of the last pulses, ICC did take the morning hours, but from 12 noon on, we were almost even with them, if not a little over quarter-hour breaks. So that was an incredible thing for a tiny radio station really fighting one of the only giants in the state of Connecticut. And you had to keep it local as much as possible.
A viable station and doing pretty good business, and, primarily talk, played some music.
News, sports, and weather for you. Radio 1450, WNAB.
Dave Vita. For 47 or 77.
That's a nice way to start. Number 47, your contract is now reneged upon. This is number 50 of the year 1977. Hello there. WNAB, Barbara Streisand, and My Heart Belongs to Me. That's song number 50 on the top 50 of 1977. I'm Dave Frida. We have just decorated the entire control room. Flash is down. I'm trying to put on my hat here, my party hat, and the Bridgeport weather, mostly cloudy with a chance of showers or flurries tonight. There goes my hat. Lowest temperatures in the low 30s or 0 Celsius.
Ray Carroll was the morning guy, and Tiny Markle. Wonderful, outstanding guy.
Bob Craig.
A guy named Tiny Markle, who was a legendary guy in Connecticut radio, especially in New Haven and Bridgeport. He was the program director of the station. He had worked in Bridgeport for years, as well as New Haven, and he eventually went to work for Press Gilmore in Bridgeport, I think back in the late 60s, 70s. And he was a real sweet guy. He was just really a genuinely nice guy. And unfortunately, he died very young, but he was PD at the station at the time when I worked there.
Well, back to Bridgeport anyways, when the first rating book came out from Arbitron in the spring of 1974, WEZN had made tremendous gains. My recollection was it debuted with a 14 share. ICC still kept its huge numbers in morning drive, but we beat NAB, and I think every day part, maybe except morning drive. At any rate, within a year or two, EZN was the number one station in Bridgeport, 12 plus, 25 to 54, and basically this is pretty much it for NAB. After a couple of years, EZN just basically finished them off both from a ratings point of view and from a revenue point of view, and the station went into sort of a steep decline.
Effective midnight, Sunday night, March 31st, 1985, WNAB will temporarily suspend operations for equipment repair and replacement and for format evaluation. We regret any inconvenience this may cause you, our listeners, and we assure you that every effort will be made to speed our return to the air.
After going off the air, the station returned to the air in November 1985 as WJBX. In 1989, it became WCUM La Cumbre Radio.
WNAB, which is now WCUM La Cumbre, a Spanish station.
1320 WATR.
Tom Shute.
Well, in 1934 is when it went on the air, and so it was one of the first AM radio stations on the air in Connecticut and in the country.
Gene Valentino.
Harold Thomas was an engineer who worked with the old Yankee Shepherd network out of Providence and Boston, and he got a license to go on the air in Waterbury, and I don't know, there's a question as to whether it was WATR on the air first or WBRY, which in the early days was W1XBS, and they were owned by the Republican American newspaper. But anyway, they went on the air within a year of each other.
Dick Ferguson.
Harold Thomas and his family, who owned WATR, and
again, Tom Shute.
So the Thomas family, now the Thomas Gilmore family, still owns the radio station. And it's got quite an amazing history in the greater Waterbury area and in the valley. And it's been on the air continuously ever since that time.
Again, Gene Valentino.
I started part-time at WATR in Waterbury with one of the deans of Connecticut Broadcasting. That was Sam Ellman, who is the manager of the station for Harold Thomas, who built WATR and also WNAB in Bridgeport. Well, in the early days at WATR, we were on, I think it was Grand Street, Lower Grand Street, up next door to the Hadley building, and it was in its early stages. And in the early days, when I got there in 1943, they had already been on the air about 10 years, so I was sort of a neophyte. They were the final days of World War II, and the time there was very dramatic because the war was in its most decisive moments. It was the Battle of the Bulge, and there was a toss-up in August, September, and October of 44 as to which way the war was going to go. But during those days, working at the radio station was very dramatic because everything was network radio for the most part, and we were the ABC network at the time, as well as Mutual Network. But the early days in Waterbury were very dramatic days, and of course we always looked up to Hartford because the big gun in Connecticut was WTIC.
Wherever you go, there's radio
to brighten up your day.
Wherever you go, there's radio.
At home, at work, at play.
Rain or shine, the music's fine. It keeps you feeling great. And don't forget, we got the news
to keep you up to date.
Wherever you go, there's radio
to brighten up your day.
So don't forget to lose your blues.
The 1320 way, it's WATR in Waterbury.
Again, Gene Valentino.
Well, the most significant thing I did was put WATR on the air while I was assistant manager in 1955 when they had the great flood. Well, anyway, I was assistant manager, and Sam Ellman was the manager, and he called me at my home. He says, Gene, he says, the studios on Meadow Street, he says, are underwater. Don't bother, he says, coming down. He says, we have the day off. He says, the whole town, the whole area is flooded. Well, it occurred to me that our transmitter was out on Baldwin Avenue on high ground. So I called an engineer. We went out to the transmitter, and he fooled around there a bit. I says, can you put the station on? He says, yes. He got it on, and we put the station on the air. Bango, we went on the air, and of course, we didn't have the teletype because that was at the studio. So we got reports from on the air, and I contacted the hospitals and everything. And then once we were on the air, naturally the whole staff got in their car and came over to the transmitter. And then we had everybody working. And well, the short of a long story was that we were the only radio facility on the air for about 3 or 4 days during the height of that disastrous flood, broadcasting announcements from the Red Cross, the fire department, and we were really the lifeblood of the whole city. That, I think, was the most significant thing I did, was put that radio station on the air in 1955. And because no other stations were on the air in the valley, it was all flooded out, everybody was tuning us in. And I think it was the greatest public service a radio station could have done to an area.
You've heard the news, the latest news. It's really great to be up to date. But don't you touch that dial, don't go away. We want to entertain you all the rest of the day.
At 1320 WATR in Waterbury.
Sophie Zembruski is amazing. She is actually, talk about radio history. Her husband's Polish program went on the air in 1934.
And my husband aired his first show on his birthday in September 1 of 1934.
The same year as WATR.
They're very, very good to me at WATR.
Sophie Zembruski.
Because they opened their doors on June 14th of 1934, and my husband started on his birthday the same year. Polish Eagle Show. My late husband was the one who started. I didn't even know him then. It was way back in 1934. Well, we got married in 1940 in Victor's orchestra. Now and then he had his orchestra come in, but mostly it was records. I have loads and loads of recordings from way back to, I used to go in and we had like a Mr. and Mrs. show. And then when he got sick, that's when I really took over.
And then when Victor Zembruski suffered a stroke, she pretty much took over the program, and she's been doing it ever since. So the show has been continuously running since 1934, and she still comes. She's about 90 years old, and she still comes in every week to tape the show. Amazing.
Well,
and she has a tremendous amount of fans.
Oh, my gosh, do I ever. Especially now, my God, from Georgia, from Carolina, from Florida, Long Island. I got loads of listeners out in Long Island. Oh, I get mail from all over. This week I got some from Florida. They must be vacationing out there.
Sophie Zembruski.
Al Warren.
She does the polka show on Sunday morning. I remember I engineered for her and her husband back in the early 60s at ADS on Sunday morning. She's still around doing their program. And I believe that's the longest continuing broadcast in Connecticut. Started about 1934. She's a lovely lady.
Oh, she's wonderful. She is unbelievable. This woman is in her upper 80s, and I remember going to a party and someone saying to me, "Now point out Sophie Zembruski." And I said, "That's Sophie right there." No, you don't understand. I mean, Sophie Zembruski. I said, "Yes, that's Sophie Zembruski." I said, "It can't be." First of all, the woman looks phenomenal. She is tall and slim, and she carries herself. She plays golf every other day.
But she's 80-some-odd years old and sharp as a tack.
The woman is wonderful, and she's been there since the 30s. She's wonderful. She's a phenomenal woman.
I do recall being there. I was on the air at night.
Marvin Rothschild, air name Rocky the Space Jockey.
And the Rocky the Jockey situation occurred because if you go back to the 50s, outer space was just getting into play.
My baby's gone on a trip to the moon, and she won't be back too soon. She doesn't write me and I can't sleep. All I hear from her is my baby's up in a rocket machine.
And I did a show that was basically top 40 and very, very early rock. And I did kind of a really pounding type of presentation where I had a tape that was reel to reel, and it was a loop. And I used it in the background. And as I would do a record that was on the air, I would say, "This is Rocky, do you like that?" And, the loop would say, "Oh, yeah, great." And it, in other words, give me wild answers. So the loop, which was also a pounding, I'll do it on my desk, beat,
Yep,
was always there in the background. And I had a ball with it. The kids at that time loved it, and used to get, the phone would ring off the hook, and I had a ball doing it. And I really had a ball in Waterbury. Waterbury, was really, I don't know whether it still is, it was kind of a blue-collar copper town. I always got along with everybody there. I enjoyed my time there, and my memories of Waterbury are pleasant. I do recall that they had a parade in Waterbury. I'm trying to recall the occasion of the parade, but they asked me to be in it. I had a cousin, a second or third cousin or second cousin, that lived in Waterbury, and he had a convertible. And they asked if I would get him to decorate the convertible and have me sit on the back, wave to the crowd as we went down the parade route. And they had me kind of dressed up in what at the time would have been, I guess, acceptable as outer space dress. I can't recall how but they had me dressed up kind of, an outer space type thing, coming from Mars or wherever. And they had me sitting up in the back of the convertible. They had signs, I'm sure, on either side with the station call letters, and I recall that parade vividly. And I forget where it wound up, in front of City Hall or wherever, and it was just a lot of fun.
John Bunnell.
We also have a young lady in the morning that does a show called Coffee Break. Very interesting lady. Her name is Barbara Davitt.
Again, Tom Shute.
Barbara Davitt, amazing person, just beloved in the Waterbury community.
And she's very interesting. She does a half-hour show in the morning coffee break, and she does a lot of interviews with personalities. And
she came to us in 1963 and is still with us.
Barbara Davitt.
I listened to the three stations that were in town at the time, the WWCO, WQQW, and WATR, and I decided it was WATR that I wanted. So I started going in and bombarding Sam Melman, who was the manager at the time. And his feeling was that women were dial twisters, and that certainly I couldn't sell advertising because I'd be propositioned. But I wouldn't let up, and finally he got tired of seeing me, so he hired me as the weather girl.
I think she came up as the weather girl, believe it or not. That sounds sexist, but in 1963 it was pretty cool, I guess.
Let's see what the weather is going to do. Will the skies be cloudy or blue? Stand by for the weather report.
So that at 5 o'clock in the morning, I would receive a call from the station, the news director at the station, and he would read me the weather. I would write it down, and he would record me as I said the weather back into the phone. And then I would go into work in the morning, and I would do little things like send out gifts and what have you. And then he was tragically killed. Kids were playing tag in a car. And when he died, the son-in-law of the owner took over as manager, Press Gilmore. And he called me in one day and he said, I've got a great idea. I really think you should be on the air. And of course, all I could say was, what a fine idea. Why didn't I think of that? So that's how I started, and it was my first day at work was the day that President Kennedy was assassinated. And then my first day doing the program was like 2 years after that. It's a little bit of everything. I'm a member of the Outer Critics Circle, so I get to go into New York and see Broadway and off-Broadway shows. And I come back and I review them. I review theater in this area. If there's someone interesting coming through town, I interview them. I do authors. I've done Barbara Bush. And I do a little bit of everything, but I also do local. I have interesting local people on with me. And when I don't have a guest, and many times I don't, I will just chat about anything that hits me, because I don't plan anything until I get into work. I have some thrilling things that happened. I remember interviewing Joe DiMaggio, and when he came to town and he was to speak at the Waterbury Country Club, someone said, I can get you a one-on-one, even though he's not doing that. So I went up to the country club, and we all sat in the big room, and into the room he came, and I thought to myself, I hope not, but I think he's drunk, and this would really destroy me. And then I realized he was so extremely shy. But afterwards, I sat down and I talked with him, and there were people running around taking pictures. Do you think I thought, please get a picture of me with Joe DiMaggio? Yeah. No, I didn't, and I rue it to this day. But I went over to Oakdale. I did all of the interviews over at Oakdale. I've got George Burns, and I've got Robert Goulet, and all the big people, the Harry Belafontes who were coming through Oakdale, because they used to spend weeks over there. So you got a chance to go over, see the show, do an interview, and have either lunch or dinner with them, which was very nice. I met Rose Kennedy, which was wonderful, and chatted with her. But Barbara Bush I found to be a very strong, lovely woman. And I guess we got into a discussion on air about weight. She looked me in the eye and she said, let me tell you something, Barbara. It all depends on what's happening in your head. Never look in the mirror, because in my head, I'm very tall and I'm very thin. So I think I've kept that with me ever since. So that's what I have to remember. There were a lot of interesting people.
Again, Tom Shute.
And she's always had the coffee break program on the air all these years, too. It runs from 9:30 until 10 weekdays. She's an amazing lady. She's very involved in the community. She was a noted performer and actress during the 60s and 70s. I've talked her into returning to the stage a few times. And she's a tremendous salesperson, a marketing person, and still working 4 days a week, still going strong.
Again, John Bunnell.
They had a gentleman when I was growing up in the area by the name of Wild Man Steve. Wild Man Steve did a rock and roll rhythm and blues show, and I used to listen to him every night. He was on every night, and I got to be good friends with him over the years. Steve just passed on a couple of years back down in Florida.
Again, Barbara Davitt.
I remember Bob Gillespie was the news director. I remember Jim Sullivan was the morning man.
Al Vestro did a show at WATR, very popular, and called all the basketball games and football games in the area.
I remember Tony Marvin. I forgot to tell you about him. Remember Tony Marvin?
Was he Arthur Godfrey's?
Yes. He was with us at ATR.
Hi there. This is Tony Marvin inviting you to join me every weekday at 3 for Tony's Time right here on WATR. It's purely entertainment with yours truly, a mixture of chatter about this and that, some great American firsts, and music that will make you smile, tap your toes, or in some cases get up and dance around the room, or maybe even cheer. So come on and stay with Tony M. from 3 to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday. It'll be fun.
Oh, yes, he came in and did the show every afternoon. He did the afternoon show, and he used to play all these lovely melodies, and then he decided that he just didn't want to be in the East anymore, and he moved to Florida. Tony Marvin was there probably in the 80s.
Chuck Asplund, who went by the name of the Night Owl, did a show similar to mine, the Night Owl show. He just retired about 8 years ago. Waterbury turned out a lot of terrific DJs and music over the years. Tom Shute, who is program director and station manager, does his show from 6 to 10.
Tom Shute, who is our general manager, our jack of all trades, our morning man, and our program director, has been there for 20 years. As a matter of fact, I was instrumental in hiring him because I knew he was absolutely right for that station.
Again, Tom Shute.
I've been at WATR this month 23 years.
Wow.
Which I never expected, but I'm still there. Most morning men, though, go to bed at 8 or 9 o'clock at night. I can't do that. I'm a night person as well as a day person, and I do a lot of things at night. I direct shows and perform and do an awful lot of community events in the greater Waterbury area. So, I MC events and go to dinners and things. So I got used to getting up early in the morning, and I take a little power nap in the afternoon, and then I go back out at night. So it's really a long day, but it's very enjoyable. The good thing is there's very little traffic on your way to work, and you get good service if you want a cup of coffee because nobody's in your way. So it's you get used to it. I think it took about 6 months to a year to really get my body used to it, but now it's been so long, it's fine.
We had Jay Clark. Jay Clark did our talk show for many years, and the world swore by Jay Clark. And he was extremely opinionated. But Jay Clark moved to Florida, but we had him for many years.
I can recall when I was first there, Jay Clark was the talk host, and he was just so well known and had tremendous ratings, but nobody ever dared to, disagree or step on Jay's toes in the building. Well, I was relatively new, and I was hired as program director. I have been general manager now for a long time, but at the time I was the new program director, and that was unfortunately about a year and a half later when I think it was the Challenger that exploded. And so he was in the middle of his talk show, and I did what I should have done. I went in and pulled the talk show off the air and switched, did the news bulletins and switched to the network to make sure we kept our audience informed on this horrible tragedy. And people in the building were holding their breath, saying, "Oh my gosh, what's he going to say?" And when he got off his shift, the next day he looked me up and said, "Tom Shute, are you the man responsible for taking my show off the air and running the live reports about the space explosion?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, it was the right thing to do." So I got Jay's respect immediately, which I was very proud of. But he was a legend, and nobody dared to cross his way. But he thought I was very impressive that I had the chutzpah to pull him off and put that on, put the actual news broadcast on the air.
Then we have a talk show, Talk of the Town with Ed Flynn from 10 to 1, very popular talk show.
And then we have Ed Flynn, who does our talk show between the hours of 10 and 1. Ed's been there 15 years. And behind the scenes, we have Paula, who does our traffic, who's been there 20 years. There's a gal who started in television when we had Channel 20. So we had a lot of stations. We had NAB in Bridgeport, and we had TOR in Torrington. And, of course, we had Channel 20 television. And Trish Torello was working with Channel 20 at the time. And she still works for the radio station. And I think she's been there for 30-some-odd years. Just unbelievable. So, you don't have to go far to find a friend.
Again, John Bunnell.
And then on the weekend, it's all specialty shows. A gentleman by the name of Vinny Banda does Saturday Morning Mayhem. Crazy show in the morning, but a fun show. Jay Crawford does the Music Museum on Saturday nights from 6 to 10. Music from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I do my show from 6 to 10 on Sunday nights. Just strictly the 50s, early 60s, pre-Beach Boy, Beatles, that era. And mainly rock and roll, rhythm and blues, and doo-wop. And we're on the internet worldwide.
The beauty of working at WATR Radio is that it's still family-owned since 1934. Now, What station can make that statement?
It's the last AM station in Waterbury, family-owned and operated.
Again, Dick Ferguson.
Harold Thomas and his family, who owned WATR and the FM that became WWYZ, and a TV station at Channel 20.
I can remember with Channel 20 because we were all one then. I can remember doing shows at Halloween. Would I dress up as Mrs. Adams? You know, we would do shows for kids. I mean, it was just, we got to do everything. It was nice. And, you know, and the grandsons are involved. Mr. Thomas put it on the air, and his grandsons are involved. I mean, it's just wonderful. The Gilmore family, the Thomas Gilmore family are still there.
Again, Tom Shute.
The Gilmore family made a commitment to keep the station on the air. You know, over the years, they've owned a number of radio and TV stations, and as they sold them off, they really wanted to keep WATR because it's part of their family heritage, and they knew that if they sold it to one of those giant corporations that was coming through the area, it would be nothing but a jukebox or a syndicated talk show. So they're committed to keeping it on the air as long as they possibly can, which is so good for the community and good for radio.
We're still part of the community. People say, I heard it on WATR. And if they heard it on WATR, it must be true. Because we've been there. We're all friends. You know, they know us. They've listened to us for such a long time. And we never, ever lost track of the fact that we serve the community. Now, you know, there are other stations that simulcast are coming from off places, but not ATR. We've been here, and we're still there, and we will continue to be, which is something I'm very proud of.
We are a full-service radio station in an era when nobody really does it anymore.
WATR FM went on the air in 1961. By 1974, it had the call letters WWYZ. Bryant Thomas.
WATR FM, which was up there, 92.5, which is now WWYZ. And WATR FM used to simulcast a lot of its programs with its AM station in Waterbury, and then it went to separate programming in the afternoon about 5 o'clock, and it did all Portuguese programming until it signed off the air at night. This was in the late 60s, and that was a way of allowing it to pay for itself. I mean, these FM stations were just not viable, and AM owners were just looking for anything to pay the light bill and all the other things that went with it.
I was out of work for a couple of months.
Bob Craig.
And I wound up talking with a guy named Press Gilmore, who owned WNAB in Bridgeport and WWYZ, as well as WATR in Waterbury. And I went to him and I said, Press, you have an FM radio station that is doing nothing. It was a beautiful music station. It was like 16th out of 16 radio stations. And I said, I have an idea for a format. I said, I would like to do a soft rock format. At that time, that meant people like Crosby, Stills and Nash, Billy Joel, a lot of these emerging artists, the Moody Blues, people from the 60s into the 70s, the Carly Simons were beginning to be heard. They were having hits, and they were having hit albums, Joni Mitchell. And I said, I believe there's a format in there which would be kind of a beautiful music, but with rock artists. And he really didn't know what I was talking about. And he said, if the fall book comes out in 1975, and if it's really lousy, he said, then we can talk. I said, you got a deal. So when the fall book came out in Hartford, he called me and said, he said, why don't we talk about this format a little bit more? So I went up to see him in Waterbury, and we talked, and he seemed to be interested, and he had his son, who was the chief engineer at the time at the station, and he was also into that music, and Press looked to his son and said, well, he said, what do you think? So he said, I think it could be a winner. So I left in the spring of 76 to form WWYZ. And I didn't really know exactly what we were going to call it, but I was getting together the music and the albums and the tracks. And at the last minute, I decided we were going to call the station YZ, the Natural 92.
Natural 92. YZ plays to you.
Well, we put the station on the first day of summer in 1976, and within a week we had some incredible response from people sending us letters, people calling the station, and we were virtually commercial-free because they hardly had any commercials. So we actually had people saying they wanted to donate money because they were so impressed with the radio station. And we started getting calls from people out in Long Island, southern Vermont, in through central Massachusetts. And the station, although physically the studios were in Waterbury, the transmitter was up on the Meriden Mountain, where most of the Hartford stations had their towers. So we, in effect, had a Hartford New Haven signal that was very strong. And we had that reach from southern Vermont all the way to Long Island. So within a week, we knew that we had a winner.
Walt Pinto.
They were looking for a program director at WWYZ. This is probably 4 or 5 years before they went country. And I was hired and stayed there for about a year and a half, and then I moved on to Springfield for an opportunity I couldn't pass up. But
Light 92.5 FM, 10 minutes before 2 o'clock. Griffin handing the reins over to Big John Seville in a couple seconds. And more 40-minute continuous music sweeps. Stay with us.
In those days, they were using the phrase light and easy. And my morning man was Jack Cradaville, who is now working on the number one station in New York City, Light FM down in New York, WLTW. Jack Becker was doing afternoons.
I worked over at WWYZ, 92.5 FM.
Skip Franco.
I did the overnights over there for quite some time. We had good people working there. Walt Pinto, formerly of DRC, formerly Kent Clark, was my PD, and couldn't ask for a better guy. But it was great working there. We played, MOR and middle-of-the-road music, and like that.
Good afternoon and happy holiday weekend to you. It's 2:01 at Light 92.5 FM, WWYZ, Waterbury, New Haven, Hartford, Light 92.5 FM. I'm John Seville, and we have 40 minutes of continuous light rock music.
And let's see, I went there in 85, and I went up to Springfield at the beginning of 87. They probably went country around 89 or 90, somewhere in there.
Broadcasting as a community service of the University of Hartford, this is WWUH West Hartford, WAPJ Torrington, WDJW Summers, and WWEB Wallingford. And now back to Connecticut Radio Memories. WBRY came on the air in 1934. Ken Griffin.
WBRY, WWCO, WATR, all in Waterbury.
Well, since Fashions and Melody has come on the air at WBRY, we've had, a great big stack of telephone calls asking us about our theme song and what the title of it was. We'll tell you once more that it's Ray Block in the orchestra. There's a tune called Don't Ever Leave Me.
Bill Flower.
Also in the market at that time was a station that I was personally very fond of because I'd been involved with it as a kid, WBRY.
John Bunnell.
WBRY, Wally King comes to mind. Wally King was very popular here in the area. His son is Larry Rifkin, who's one of the head men at CPTV.
And a fellow named Bob Holzer was one of the mainstays over there, and Walter Howard and several other names. They were affiliated with the Waterbury Republican American at the time. In fact, I think they were owned by the Waterbury Republican American at one time.
Robert Hall Close presents Fashions in Melody. Yes, Fashions and Melody, a recorded suppertime serenade brought to you Monday through Friday at this same time by Robert Hall Close of 196 Mill Street, just 200 feet south of the Baldwin Street Bridge. And now it's 1/4 hour of popular Fashions in Melody. And this evening we open up with a little tune that we think you're all going to like. It's called Relatives, Relatives, Relatives.
Gene Valentino.
Well, WBRY was owned by the newspaper. The Republican American was a very dynamic force in Waterbury, and they still are. They're almost the moral conscience of the city, and they were a very good newspaper. And they ran a good operation, and seeing the competition of radio in the early days, recognizing it, they bought a radio station. But they ran the station by the remote control. The big thing was the newspaper, and they had other people running the station, of course. And while they were very much concerned, the thrust of their involvement was newspaper. But WATR came on, and they were solely for radio, so they had to make a go of it. The competition at the beginning was rather fierce and continued just as it would be in the Hartford market between stations like TIC and WDRC and a number of others. I got started in Waterbury, Connecticut through a freak, actually. It was in 1944. World War II was still on. I was working in the Waterbury Manufacturing Company, the Chase Brass and Copper Company in Waterbury in the office. And a friend of mine suggested I join the Civic Theater and one of their plays. So I went for a tryout. It was strange. We had the audition at a radio station, And it turned out that the program director at the radio station at WBRY, who was Walter Howard, was also director of the Civic Theater. Well, there was a mix-up when I got in there. This is sort of humorous because he thought I was coming in to audition as an announcer, and that wasn't the case. Well, anyway, I wound up with a job as a part-time radio announcer, and I never did get into the Civic Theater. I even started, in later years, the first talk show in the state of Connecticut, and that was called Exchange Place. I named it after the central area of Waterbury, which has the same name. And I did that talk show. I did it on WBRY, and that show originated from Jack Schmidt's Harton House in the east end of Waterbury, and it was the first talk show on radio in the state. WTIC followed about a year or two later with a program called Mike Line, I guess it was. But the show from Waterbury was indeed very popular because of the popularity of the show, which was on the air from the late 50s through the 60s and into the 70s.
Again, Ken Griffin.
It was back in 1951. I just loved radio since I was 9, and I used to listen to it, and I ended up at WBRY in Waterbury, Connecticut. And I was 12 years old, and I went over to the radio station, and they said, "Is it okay if I come in there?" I said, "Sure, but you can't work here." I said, "Why?" "Well, you're too young." So I waited. I still hang around for 3 years, and when I was 16, they gave me a job. They paid me $50 a week while I was going to school. Sweet Daddy on the scene with the record machine, and played a bunch of records with Lou Dennis, who became a vice president of Warner Brothers Records.
Again, Bill Flower.
WBRY was at that time quite what I would call old line radio. Later, WBRY hired an afternoon disc jockey named Lou Dennis, and Lou built up a very sizable audience and a very sizable following.
Again, John Bunnell.
When I was growing up, Lou Dennis was very popular at BRY.
Lou was there in the 57, 58 era, and I think he was still on the air when I started in 59. But once Lou left, and he was there a number of years, once Lou left, I think BRY kind of went downhill from there.
It's at 5 minutes to 11 o'clock. The temperature now is 39 degrees at WBRY. You're listening to Lance Drake, and it's Friday night, and I think it stopped raining out there. I hope it did. It was supposed to snow. Please don't snow. Don't snow on me. Don't let the snow fall on Stop it. Stop it. That's so bad. Hey, listen, we got an orange clock. What do you call it? A clockwork orange. I can't even say it. The clockwork orange is going to be on a little later with that sweet little innocent Lorraine. I love that record, don't you, gang?
1590 right on top of your dial. This is WBRY.
WBRY News is on the air.
In the late 1950s, the Waterbury Republican American sold WBRY, and in the late 60s, it became WTBY. Don Mino.
1590 isn't even on the air anymore, but I was there at two different times. Top 40 and WTBY. Again, as a lot of stations had abbreviations for the town.
Well, Johnny landed some funk by the buckets full. 10:04. This is the real Scott Morgan at WTBY, playing your basic thingies at 754-6149. Glad you tuned us in, baby. You'll find out where it's happening right here with the #1 sound of the real Scotty Morgan. WTBY. Jones's sounds, tempting ones, tall and proud temptations. Don't let the Joneses get you down. Don't mess with them, baby. It ain't worth it.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the much more fun sound of Chip Hobart.
Sly Stewart's a family song here on Heaviness Deals. The real heaviness comes on your brain at midnight.
This is the sound of CBS in Central Connecticut, WTBY Waterbury.
Hello, love. This is Chip, and we're doing it on the radio. There's the Big 16. Get your hitline request in now to the Pepsi hitline, 754-6140 and 49.
By 1973, its call letters had changed again to WQQW.
Music, news, sports, drama, total entertainment on QQ Radio 16, WQQW Waterbury.
QQ Radio 16, yeah, Elton John, Kiki D, Don't Go Breaking My Heart. Well, if you're sitting around and you don't know what to do tonight, QQ After Dark's coming up, letting you know what's happening in the area clubs and concert halls. Keep it here.
And then the last, an easy listening station.
QQW was doing more of in those days, what you would call a kind of an MOR, middle-of-the-road format.
Steve Martin.
And Tom Coffey, who had been program director at CO in Waterbury when I was first there and had been in New Haven for a number of years, he and a couple of other guys bought WQQW. As I say, they were doing just kind of a middle-of-the-road thing, and I was the news department, which in most of those stations that was the case. It was a one-man news operation.
Again, Don Mino.
But in 72, 73, I was back to Waterbury at QQW, which at that time had gone to easy listening stuff like the Montavanis and Percy Faith and so forth. And really in 73 was one of the stranger occurrences that I had, because one day I'm driving to work, I'm listening to the station, and I'm saying, gee, there's the midday man, the program director, and he's not playing the stuff that I'm playing, and he's having a good time. They switched format at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I used to come on at 2. 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they switched format. I think it was on a Tuesday afternoon. They walked in. We used to use reel-to-reel tape recorders for the background music. One of the owners came in, pushed them out of the way, said, here, play these. We had no jingles. We had no updated commercial copy. But I walked in, and we are playing Edward Bear. We're playing Neil Young. We're playing Crocodile Rock with Elton John. Which
well,
was
that's
very
quite
popular.
A change.
Well, one afternoon, I thought my radio in the car was broken.
Dave Billis.
That was back 1991, early 1992, right before QQW went off the air. I did a Saturday night show from 7 p.m. to 1 a.m. Basically, the first part of the show, we did a Sounds of Sinatra, the syndicated show that was on LP, the weekly show, and then from 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. we did a bunch of stuff, a lot similar to the Music of Your Life program. Most of the material was on reel-to-reels, and we'd have to change that. We had also individual songs on cart, and stuff like Sinatra, Bing Crosby, Nat King Cole, as well as a lot of the big band stuff, or the pop music that was non-rock and roll, basically. We were located in downtown Waterbury. Basically, it was like the beginning of South Main Street. Broadcast Center, I believe, was the name of it. It was a fairly new building at that time. They had a regular morning guy. To the best of my recollection, it was Tom Coffey. I know there was a talk show. I believe Lou Morton did a show at that time. Tim Clark was the program director. We had Carousel Italiano. Jay Crawford, who's now on WATR, he does an oldies show on Saturday nights. He preceded me on Saturday afternoons. As far as the ratings went, I'm not exactly sure where we stood. I know there were some financial issues with the radio station, and that's why there was a group of investors, and they wound up closing the doors. Right around when the doors closed there, it was kind of a sad time. Yeah. It's like a chapter of history closing.
WWCO AM came on the air in 1946.
I went over to WWCO when they went on the air in 1946 or 47, immediately after the war.
Gene Valentino.
Yes, I went on the air 1 month after they went on the air. WWCO was put on the air by two attorneys in Waterbury, two brothers, Milton and Mitchell Myers. Milton Myers became a Superior Court judge eventually, and his brother Mitchell was a city court judge in Waterbury. They built WWCO. They had built a station in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, where they started, and that was WEIM. And about a couple of years later, built one in Waterbury, and they went on the air at 1240. And they got the Mutual Network, which had been over WATR, but ATR had 2 or 3 networks. They had ABC, Mutual, and also the old Yankee network out of Boston. So WWCO inherited Mutual, and I went to them while I was at ATR for about 2 or 3 years, and I had a better opportunity there as a young announcer in 1947 or 48. And I went over to WWCO, where the radio station was located, curiously enough, in the Mattituck Historical Society building on West Main Street in Waterbury, opposite the Green. And we were on the second floor of the museum, and it was quite a setting for a radio station. But that was my early days in radio, where I eventually became program director and got a lot of opportunities to do interview shows and talent shows and stretch my wings from a disc jockey into interviewing, which I liked a lot. And I headed the Cancer Crusade and the March of Dimes and the Heart Campaign. I got into many of those public service things while I was on the air. A fellow named Herb Bloomberg at WWCO in Waterbury decided that maybe this youngster was worth trying.
Bill Flower.
He put me on the air for a weekend,
I did a 4-hour show on Saturday and a 4-hour show on Sunday. He called me Monday morning and asked me to come down to his office and basically put me to work for the rest of the summer on a full-time basis. It was the summer of 1959.
Well, when I worked there was a fellow by the name of Herb Bloomberg.
Al Warren.
Herb Bloomberg used to live at the hotel, the Roger Sherman Hotel, and he was a bachelor, and he's a retired Navy commander, and he invested in this radio station. He lived in New York, but he would live here during the week, and he'd go back to New York on the weekend. He was a bachelor, and Herb, I mean, I could tell you a million stories about Herb Bloomberg. He was the most eccentric guy I've ever met. He owned the station, and he was, and I remember when I first started, the first year I was there, they had 11 different guys working 7 to midnight, because he would go back to his hotel, and he would listen, and he'd call up every 2 minutes. What are you doing this for? What are you saying that for? What are you doing this? And it got to a point where the guys wouldn't answer the phone. So he puts the bat phone in. You know, that was the red phone he put in, that it went directly to the hotel room. So you know that when that phone rang, you had to answer it. And he was a handful, let me tell you.
Again, Bill Flower.
I feel very grateful to Herb Bloomberg, who unfortunately is no longer with us, but he not only brought me back as summer relief, vacation relief for each of the succeeding 3 summers, but when I graduated from college in 1962, when I was getting ready to graduate and was looking for a job in news, and that was my field once out of school, I called him to not look for a job there so much as to see if he knew of anything either in the area or anywhere else, because he had contacts nationwide. He'd been an executive with the old Dumont television network. And Herb said, I'm getting ready to start a news department, and if you would agree now, this was in March, he said, if you would agree now to be my first news director, I'll hold the job open for you till June. Well, needless to say, I jumped at it, and I worked for him. The money wasn't very good, but it was good initial experience. WWCO was a local radio station doing popular music, and that summer, as a matter of fact, they went top 40, and the following summer, they went 24 hours, and it was a middle-of-the-road station doing what at that time was considered to be rock and roll, but today would be considered still to be middle-of-the-road popular music.
Again, Al Warren.
Well, that was a good place. That was a killer radio station back in the 50s and 60s.
Super Music CO, the Waterbury area's great entertainer.
1240 CO. They just annihilated everybody. They had big numbers.
Well, I had the opportunity to do a variety of things, because that first year I was on midday, and I basically played the format that they wanted. But on those occasions when I had the opportunity to work late night or overnight, I did big band, swing, what I called happy music, vocals, lots of different things. We did not have a rigid format. During the afternoon hours, when the kids got out of school, we had a fairly standard top 40 format. But in the morning, we could play middle-of-the-road music, and I never did the morning sign-on show, but I did have an opportunity to do all of the others. And when I could play my own music, I played big band and swing. Let's see, at that time, the program director who hired me was a fellow named Alan Field.
John Bunnell.
When I was growing up at CO, there was a guy who did the Melody Matinee in the afternoon in the 50s, Bob Records Krager, very popular back in those days.
Bob Krager had been the big name in Waterbury, and had been the big name at WWCO, and had left just the year before. And as a matter of fact, they were auditioning on-air replacements for Bob that summer, and that's one of the reasons that Mr. Bloomberg was able to take me on full-time, because that way he could bring people in, use them for a while, and check them out and so forth. And toward the end of the summer, they hired a young man named Bob Rouge, and Bob became kind of Mr. Waterbury Radio for a number of years. So I got the opportunity to break Bob in on the board, and then we worked together the next several years when I came back during the summers.
Merv Griffin Radio. WWCO Waterbury, a great station in a great city.
WWCO.
You made me so very happy. 1969 Solid Gold from David Clayton Thomas and Blood, Sweat, and Tears. It's 11:07, summer of 72 fun time, along with John Beckish. 82 degrees outside. Looking for a high near 95, and if we make it, you know we'll all be charcoal broad. Well, it was #1 last week, but it slipped down a little bit for Michael Jackson of the Jackson 5. I Want to Be Where You Are. The 8th best-selling song in Waterbury this week from All Hit Music, WWCO. We've got 15 minutes past 11.
Again, John Bunnell.
WWCO over the years, Steve Skip did the mornings. The Mad Hatter was there. Eddie Maglio, the Mad Hatter, was there. Wally Mann was there. Jay Crawford, who now he works with me at WATR. He does the Saturday Night Oldies show. Jay Crawford was there. They did a rhythm and blues show. A guy by the name of Ricky J was there. Back in the 70s, that was the main jocks that were there that I can remember.
All hit music. WWCO.
Steve Martin.
I was there from 72 to 73. AM radio was still king. WWCO was doing a straight-on top 40 format on the AM, and the country on the FM.
George Benson on Broadway. 250, good afternoon. This is Danny Lyons from Super Music CO. Good to have you along.
I see Ed Flynn, I believe, was doing mornings at the time. He had been at WAVZ for a number of years in the late 60s and into the early 70s.
Hi, this is Tom Collins. Join me weeknights from 6 to 10 for more fun during CO Summer 1972.
And, of course, subsequently, coming out of that time at CO in Waterbury, there was a young man by the name of Tom Collins doing evenings.
Well, let me let you talk to Tom Collins.
Okay.
Okay, he likes rolling in the hay. As a matter of fact, he does. Hey. Hello.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi.
What is going on here?
Huh?
What's going on?
No, we were talking.
Oh, you're talking. Oh. Hey, that's a new thing. Oh, Steve's going to the Mad Hatter's house.
Pardon me?
Yeah, Steve's going to the Mad Hatter's house. Wait a minute here. We got somebody here. All right. What are you going to do? What are you going to do that's crazy?
Calm down in there.
Okay, hold on. We're being
Play
crazy.
the music.
Okay, what are you going to do that's crazy?
I'm just going to do a little imitation of disco quack.
Okay, let's hear it. Do your friends know you're doing that?
No.
They don't? Don't ever let them know. Okay? Okay. Thank you. Are you a crazy person?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Well, my girlfriend's on the other line because we have a total phone. And
You have a telephone?
No, total phone.
Oh, a total phone.
And
Oh.
she's going to play the guitar.
Is your mom and dad really rich? Is your mom and dad really rich?
No.
No? Oh. All of us have dial phones.
Really?
Well, that's neither here nor there, is it?
And his real name is Dave Cipriano. Now he's known as Joe Cipriano, and is quite famous as a voiceover announcer for NBC and Fox Network and so forth now. But he was there as a young kid doing evenings, and it was... it was an awful lot of fun, in the days of the pumped-up top 40 AM radio.
Again, Al Warren.
I know that Merv Griffin, back in the 60s, bought the CO, because I was working there when they did that.
Again, Steve Martin.
Back then it was actually Merv Griffin radio, and later when... For some reason, he had to split off, and he kept the FM and sold the AM. When they sold CO, a gentleman by the name of Peter Marcus bought it and came in and took over. But in those first days, it was Merv Griffin Radio.
Again, Al Warren.
But CO was still there, but I believe it's part of DRC, isn't it?
Again, John Bunnell.
Till 97, and they sold the DRC up in Hartford.
Wayne Mulligan.
And then in March of 97, WWCO was in dire straits, and they were about to go off the air. So the ownership of that station came to our ownership, and we came to an agreement, so we bought that radio station. So then we took over that, and we simulcast that one. Subsequently, things have evolved a little bit, and some of them haven't changed at all, actually. With WWCO, at the time, they've always carried Naugatuck High football, so we continued to do that.
WWCO FM came on the air Christmas Day, 1967. By 1973, it had the call letters WIOF for 104. Steve Martin.
Actually started out there on the FM doing news, which was a country station at that time. It was WIOF 104, and WWCO was doing a straight-on top 40.
When WWCO AM was sold, the FM station, WIOF, became the sister station to WPOP AM in Hartford. Lee Gordon.
POP was still in Newington, and WIOF was still down in Prospect. But we did the commercials for both stations at the POP studio. And we had a little link that we would send the commercials down. It was a one-way link. We could only broadcast from a studio to transmitter link, and we could only go from Newington down to Prospect. So we would produce commercials and shoot them down there via this radio link. They would record them down there and put them on the air. And we had this interoffice, we called it the pouch, just one of those standard interoffice correspondence things. And what would happen is every night, Jack Carney, who was doing afternoons down there at 104 by this time, it had switched to a light kind of format similar to what WRCH does now. In fact, WRCH was still beautiful music, and 104 was it was Magic 104, it was called.
The magic is the music. Magic W104.
And it was the only station in the market doing that format at the time. And Jack was doing afternoons there, and he would take this pile of interoffice correspondence home with him every night and plop it in front of the front door, and then I would pick it up and bring it into the office in the morning. So we were the conduit for the interoffice memos between the two buildings. But eventually, when the FCC started to relax the rules and regulations a little bit, they added on to the studio in Newington and moved the FM studio to our building. So everything was done at once. But again, getting back to Al Pellegrino, he was really kind of ahead of his time, because standard practice in the business now to have multiple stations under one roof. I mean, there's always been an AM and FM station here and there, but to have stations from various locations all kind of operating with a common sales staff and a common office staff, we were one of the first to do that. So we had a station in Waterbury and a station in Hartford, but only one sales staff selling both stations. There was one sales guy down in Waterbury who's dedicated to working down there, but the rest of it was our sales staff selling airtime on both stations, either separately or in combination.
When I started, it was a country station.
Bill Davies.
And then converted over to a soft rock. They called it Magic 104.
W104 Magic Music FM 104.
Here at W104, where the magic is, and the music of Paul Simon, Mother and Child Reunion. Barbara Mandrell from her Moods album did If Loving You Is Wrong, I Don't Want to Be Right. Barry Manilow, Can't Smile Without You, and Living Without You, Livingston Taylor. It's 23 before 11, and I'm Lou Terry.
And that made it a little bit of an easier sell, but it was sort of interesting. When they were in the countryside, they had a country staff based over in Waterbury, but we were allowed to sell combo. And then when we went to the soft rock, that was a broader format, or a broader interest, I should say. And the all news and the soft rock, I thought, was a really good combination.
And you could buy a package that was a combo. And so all the support staff, the office staff, other than one secretary and one salesperson, was all in our building. The transmitter's in Prospect. Station's licensed, as it still is, licensed to Waterbury. But when the two stations started operating as one combination, they got the city license designation changed to Waterbury Hartford. So even today on, WPHH, I think it's called now, I believe it's still, the city license is listed as Waterbury Hartford. The FM started off as Magic 104.
In 1992, WIOF became WYSR.
Then it became WYSR Star 104.1.
The new Star 104.1, superstars of the 80s and 90s. I'm Kathy Fox, sharing the workload with you on this gorgeous Friday. Star Chief Meteorologist Bill Berman says, look for clouds coming in tonight. Rain likely tomorrow and Sunday with highs in the 50s. Better hit the video store on the way home. And thanks for listening to Star 104.1. Superstars of the 80s and 90s, the new Star 104.1. No hard rock, no rap, no soft oldies mixed in. Just great songs. Like this one from Joshua Caddison. It's Beautiful in My Eyes on the new Star 104.1.
Star, which was sort of a rock format, but it was, I don't know, it was kind of a neither this nor that kind of a format. It was sort of it wasn't really top 40, and it wasn't really classic rock, and it really wasn't album rock. It was sort of something that was invented to fill a niche that really didn't need filling, I think.
In 1995, it became WMRQ for modern rock.
Then it became Radio 104, Modern Rock Radio 104. When it changed over to modern rock, I think a lot of us, even the old-timers who had been there for a long time, kind of liked that format better than, even though it was like a younger format, we kind of liked that format better.
Marty Moran.
Companies were buying up as many stations as they could and grouping them together. And at that time, in '94, one of the stations that the company that came to own HCN had picked up, they picked up the old WIOF FM, which was it was at 104.1 FM. It was an adult contemporary station. It had been a bunch of formats, but they became WMRQ, Modern Rock. And so the folks at HCN, all of us put that station on the air as a modern rock station. And that was pretty exciting, and that was a great station. I remember they put it on the air. It was Halloween night in 1994, and no DJs or anything. They didn't have DJs there for months, and the station actually did really good without DJs.
Jason Steinberg.
Radio in Hartford had kind of been doing the same thing. There were some heritage stations. There were some stations that were kind of making gradual changes, but here was a station that went from an adult contemporary format and decided to take the ultimate leap and be a real aggressive, real cutting-edge alternative station.
I think that it was probably one of the earliest modern rock stations to go on the air. It really was one of the early ones.
And then the station went on as the new 104.
It was a great format. The music was great at that time. It was almost like new wave, you know what I mean, back in the late 70s. It was sort of like that kind of a movement. The music was the antithesis of old Jurassic rock, like classic rock, and also the antithesis of CHR and Top 40. It was really pretty cool, I remember Nirvana being there, Pearl Jam. You have to remember back then, Top 40 didn't touch Pearl Jam. They really didn't, Joan Osborne was on that station, the Cranberries. It was a station that you could listen to, really, and it was just like one cool new sound after another. It was really very, very good.
In '95, it was, a really interesting time where alternative is not what you think of today. I mean, anything could have been alternative that didn't fit on other radio stations. It's felt, at this point, when I look back on it, it felt a lot looser and freer, but still it didn't lack focus. It wasn't all over the place. It was really, it was meant to be like that.
And, stuff that you wouldn't always hear was getting airplay. Really just very interesting.
We just kind of did what we felt was the right thing to do by the station. All the jocks understood what the focus of the radio station was, and everybody in their own individual way kind of enhanced that identity and the attitude and the personality of the radio station. It was a mishmash of people, of personalities that came from bigger markets to go and take on this challenge. I mean, I came from Boston and came because I knew that it would be an exciting challenge and an exciting radio station. I had no idea really how exciting, but Gina Crash came from Washington. There were a couple of people that were on the morning show that were actually from Connecticut. Adrian, who did midday, was an English guy that also had been in Boston for some time. The programmer came from Philly, John Knapp, and just a weird, interesting group of personalities that ended up getting together and really clicking. I mean, we used to do these concerts, the Big Day Out and things like that.
Four's Big Day Off at the Meadows Music Theater. 10 bands, $10, all ages.
Where, we'd be out there for 18 hours in the sun and, putting on these bands, 3 stages, 30,000 people at Riverside Amusement Park, all put on by, a bunch of radio people. And really grassroots and really just concerts put on for the fans. We made money, but it wasn't what it was about. It was really about putting on a great concert. And so at the end of these concerts, we would do these we would broadcast live all day and interviewing bands and everything. And at the end, we would and this was a model that we took from HFS in Washington, where we would just sit in a circle and just kind of pass the mic around and kind of recap the day. And I mean, it was just a bunch of whacked out, sunburned, waste of human life people, but some of the funniest and most insightful and most human radio that you could ever find. I mean, it was just a bunch of people sitting on couches after having this huge experience as a group.
In 2003, it became Power 104 WPHH. In 2007, it became WURH. Finally, in 2009, it went back to its previous call letters of WMRQ. This program is dedicated to those who participated in interviews but who passed away before the program was finished. Richard Ward Fatherly. Joe Mulhall, air name Ken Griffin. Fred Swanson, Gene Valentino, Sophie Zembruski, John Ellinger.
Hey, I can't find nothing on the radio. Yo, turn to that station.
The world is collapsing around our ears. I turned up the radio.
You've been listening to Connecticut Radio Memories, Episode 7. This program was produced and edited by Brandon Camp. Thanks to everyone who participated in interviews for this series, including those whose comments didn't make it to air. Interviews were edited for time, continuity, and clarity. This series would not have been possible without the air check collectors and other people and organizations who had the foresight to save air checks, jingles, or theme songs, and who shared them with us, including Ed Bruder from manfrommars.com, Rick Kelly of Northeast Air Checks, Bob Gilmore of Bob Gilmore's Air Checks, John Ramsey of HartfordRadioHistory.com, Dick Bertel, the Media Preservation Foundation, Tracy Carman, Bruce Camp, the Waterbury Time Machine website, Tom Shute, Al Warren. WJZZ audio licensed through the Brubeck Collection, Holt Atherton Special Collections, University of the Pacific Library, copyright Dave Brubeck. We want to send a shout out to Bill Hennessy and the bunch of old broadcasters who meet monthly to hear the Hartford Jazz Orchestra play at the Arch Street Tavern. Special thanks also to John Ramsey. Connecticut Radio Memories was produced at the studios of WWUH FM at the University of Hartford.
Tried to turn it on to save